The session this morning really is based on, well, let me say this. Most of the time when I teach things at this conference particularly, I ask my students, what do you think I should teach? And they usually kind of say, well, you've been talking about this a lot lately. This seems to be something that you're pretty passionate about right now. And I'll often get some feedback on some things that they have to say. So there was a suggestion about this. But I recently revised a book called From Postlude to Prelude that I wrote in 2000, well, it was published in 2004. I began that process in 2001. I worked on it for several years and then revised it. So it didn't actually come out exactly on the 10-year anniversary. If I had been able to work a little harder on it before, it might have come out exactly on the 10-year, but basically 11 years later, which has been a fast 11 years. So as I was working on this book revision, I had to answer some questions that I didn't have to answer before, the things that were different that in that 10, 11 year, pretty much 15 years really by the time you start a process like that. But looking back, there was quite a few things that I had assumed and taken for granted that weren't really applicable anymore. So I thought today we'll talk about what are some of those things, and I'll throw some of those things out to you. I would say from the beginning, I don't have an answer to a lot of these things, and they don't necessarily have an answer. But I've come to the place in life where I think that having answers is often not as important as asking good questions. And I'm more comfortable than I've ever been in my life. Notice that I said that I've ever been, with not having the answer to all things and believing that that's the case. And I also, before we kind of jump into the handout, I think that as teachers and as ministers, that not pretending that we have the answer is really vital for our ministry. And I think that it allows us to continue conversations. When we have, here is the answer, absolutely. And there are some things that maybe, anybody that knows me would certainly tell you that I have a lot of opinions. And I care so deeply about the things that I care about that I just can't be quiet about them. I really do care. But I also really do value the opinions of others. And I seek them out. And I have a commitment to seek out the views of others with the people that I often know that I might disagree with most. And just to say that. But I think sometimes that part of my own experience in learning and in my educational experience was that I was, at least my perception, it could have been different. I believe that I was given the answers that I was supposed to give in the church and in a ministry setting. And I think in some instances, a number of instances, I think that by the time I was in the church, the questions were different. And I think it took me quite a while in my ministry to realize that the answers that I was giving were not necessarily the answers to the questions that people were asking. So I just simply say that to you, and maybe that's some of your experience too. But I think there was a time where the answers were clear, seemed to be clear about a lot of things. And then as our culture shifted and as a lot of things changed, the answers became a bit more difficult to come by. And I believe that in the future, we're going to be known and valued by the questions we ask rather than the answers that we pose. And we are going to do a lot more musing about issues rather than coming to conclusions. And I don't know if you see that already happening in your church and even in your life. I would suggest that that's true in many issues. There are issues in the last few weeks, even in our laws and court rulings and all things where things are way more fluid and open for discussion and transition and all of that. And that's going to be the future of a more postmodern world that we live in. But as we kind of look toward that and just some opening comments like that, I want us to start with a little bit of a question of how did we get to where we are. This little model that I use here at the beginning is from my book, From Memory to Imagination. And this model has been picked up by some other people to kind of an oversimplification of what's happened, but yet a way to kind of lock in a little bit. In the 1950s, I've said that church music was primarily controlled in the halls of academia. In the 1950s, schools, colleges, seminaries were full with people, lots of people that had come back from the war with the GI Bill, and for the first time had the financial means to go to school, people coming from farms and all kinds of areas. So colleges and universities, and particularly seminaries, flourished, and lots of people went into ministry. It was a time when, as a result of a huge national tragedy like a war, people are often called to do great humanitarian things in those moments, and they came back and did that. Well, our churches were eager, as I understand it in those days, to embrace educated people. I was not a child of the 50s, but I was long after that, and there was this desire for people to be more educated, and a desire for us, every church desired to have educated leaders. We wanted people with training. We wanted somebody to lift us, the perception at least at that time would be to lift us to higher things, and to offer us the great music of the world, and to bring those things to us, and to offer that, as I perceived it, and still do, as hopeful, as high things and hopeful things. And that's where we were, so we embraced that. So that meant whatever educational institutions did, the church was eager to receive. And there was a day that perhaps some of you remember when churches embraced those things wholeheartedly. And then, as we see, there was a time when we said, no, we don't embrace that, and then we even resist it in a huge way. And we'll get there in a moment. In the 1960s, I used the term the church basement. I think that all change happens in a process. And often in church, change happens in the youth group. And it happens with the people who are most connected to a culture, which are always the younger people. And we'll touch on that in a moment. But it always happens to younger people. So in many big churches in the 1960s, the basement could represent certainly the bottom floor, but oftentimes those were youth groups hung out, and youth, it's a place where you can decorate and change, and you can do all these things. So eventually, as the music began to change in our culture, and as we embraced more folk idioms and pop idioms and all those kinds of things, then young people began to say, well, what can we do about that? And then young people were writing music, and we all kind of have a sense of that history. Well, things started changing in the youth group. And as things change in the youth group, then if you can imagine music creeping up the stairs, if you can just imagine how things sort of creep up. And then eventually, it's kind of knocking on the door of the sanctuary, and then we find ourselves moving up the stairs, and then we know something's changing. We know things are changing when things start knocking on our door, and we're hearing something more than one time. And I would suggest to us as ministers, when we start to hear knocks on our door and voices, that could be symbolic of people, conversations, when people in your church start to ask questions, and the questions start to come from numerous places, then that's a time we always must pull away and say, now what is it I'm hearing? What are people saying? And I would say, from whatever wisdom I have, is that if we can respond proactively, then we can have a role in the conversation. And I think when we choose not to be proactive in those conversations, we are at our greatest risk of leadership. Because we choose sometimes our demise. We make a choice. Here's my observation. Here's an example. A number of years ago, many years ago now, our church, some of you are connected to some churches I've been in the past, but even kind of before that, I realized that I was going to be forced to do something, that the knocks had been numerous and the conversations had been many, and the conversations in staff meeting had begun to rumble. And I somehow knew that if I didn't make some changes, I was going to be forced to make some changes regarding the music in our church. If there's one thing I know about myself, it's if I can make the change in advance of the being forced to, then I can get my head around it and respond. But the one thing I don't do well is being forced to do things. Because that control is huge for me. And when I feel like I have lost control, then it doesn't bring out the best in me. And it's not just that I'm angry and controlling, really. It's that I feel bad about myself, ultimately. It's that I feel I value hearing people, and when I haven't done that, then I really do come down hard on myself, and I feel like I haven't been a minister, and I've been an ego and all these things. So it's really not just about power, it's really about the core of who I am and what I really want to do. And I don't think that's just a nice spin on things. I really think that's where I hurt the most, actually. It's where the greatest pain is. I would also suggest we learn a lot through pain. Pain is often our best teacher. And for some people, it is about the only way that we learn. I hope I'm not that guy that I would be probably the one not to know. Others may assess that better than I. Which I've also learned is many times how you see yourself is not really how others see you, both positively and negatively. And I think that's a pretty safe way to live, really. If you're as good as people thought you are, we're not. And most of us are not as bad as our worst critics think we are either. Somewhere in the middle. I tell students all the time, life is really about averages. The students that performed in the recital the other day, I told them, the truth is if you could perform at your average for the rest of your life, that is all you can expect. And any time on a Sunday morning, if we all perform in a sense on a Sunday morning, if you can go in and you can hit your average, that's amazing. Because what would tell us that every time we do something in public, it's going to be better than the last time? And how crazy are we going to be to ourselves and other people when we expect always to do better than we ever should have done based on our preparation? So again, honest things that we need to realize. So I just tell students all the time, let's practice enough that we're upping, as my friend Al Travis says, that we're able to improvise out of our overflow. That improvisation comes from what you already know. It comes from the skills that you have. And in the moment, improvisation is what we do from what we have practiced. He also goes on to talk about life as improvisation, which has been very, very helpful for me, because I think nearly every conversation in ministry is an improvisatory conversation. And you don't know what people are going to ask until they ask it. And how you answer it is going to be based on everything that you have accumulated up to that moment in your life. And what is inside you is going to flow forward. So that's so much I talk to students about ministry as improvisation. Because how many conversations have you had in the last 2 years in ministry that you anticipated? I've got to the point, this is rambling a bit, but I've gotten to the point where I do an oral exam in almost every class that I teach. because I believe that in ministry, most of our teaching is what people ask the question and how we respond. And so the material that we have is nearly useless if we can't call it up. How does that affect a rehearsal? You really don't have time in rehearsal to say, let me Google that. Let me find the answer for that. You have to, the sound is awful, and you have to respond, or it's not quite there, and you try something. And what you try is what you have learned and seen. So most of what we do is, and that's a big deal, isn't it? That puts a lot of pressure on us, right? Because think of the multitasking that so many things in the moment require of us. So the way I say that to students is, let's all be thankful that we have the minds to do this. And we have the ability, rather than beating ourselves up about how we're not doing as well as we wish we were, which is counterproductive. All right, I'm so rambling, I'm sorry.
It's improvisational.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I sometimes think that I shouldn't teach at 8 o'clock because I tend to ramble at early in the mornings. Okay, where to now? In the 1980s, the question was, where are we going? Where are we going? But I think probably a big part of that was also denial. My graduate training was all in the 1980s. And at that time, I was taught all of this new music that's coming forth and the stuff that had been spawned in the 60s and 70s and all that. This is here for a moment. It is going to be gone, and we're going to return back to the grander day of all these amazing things, and it is going to be your responsibility to inherit this great world, and you will go, and if you teach it, they will learn it, they will welcome you and say, please change my world, and I'm going to love your music, and all things are going to be good. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case at all, so there's a huge level of denial. And denial is difficult, and denial will impede our progress. Another side I would say is if you're in a certain situation in your life and you are there and it is the way it is, then the best thing you can tell yourself is, this is the way it is. This is not going to change, and my response is all that I have, and work to make the best response you can make, and we're going to be better off for that. So where do we go? I think that was the question that began to be posed in the 1980s as some of us began to move out of the period of denial. In the 1990s, this new music and these changes had moved fully into the sanctuary. If not in your church, they were in someone's sanctuary. I also would suggest to you, if it's in somebody's sanctuary, it will be in yours. And if you find a historical model to go against that, please tell me. But when it shows up in somebody's church, very much of it, it's going to show up for you. So we need to learn from that. So things are here. Now where are we since the year 2000 and beyond? I really couldn't tell you that because we're far too close to really know. Now I will at the end of the session project some things that I think are happening or going to happen, and what I would consider some directions. But I think that where we are in the church in this time is that we are not going to be the church cloistered. We're not going to be just the people who gather around in our own denomination, our own congregation. We are going to be charged to find ways to open the doors of our church and say, now, what difference does the gospel make to the people? And I believe that as music leaders, we have the potential to lead that charge. I believe that here's what I would say. Music is the one element of the church in its worship and its program and all of those things, that has had the most critique and has been under the greatest scrutiny in the last 50 years. Could it be that God has been doing that to humble us, to put us in a place where we are willing to let our the things that we are trained toward, our ego, to let some of that diminish and really say, now what is it that the gospel might call me to do? Now, I would just suggest to you, when I make those kind of statements, they're not easy because I don't necessarily want to go to all the places that I might be called to go. But I believe that that is the call that we have. And I believe that music might really be it. Have words diminished in their power in the last 40, 50 years? Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Some of you are saying no.
Awesome, all of those words are so.
Words are becoming less and less and less powerful. How many people read a long advertisement for a product?
Knowingly? Or?
No. How many people do? Nobody, Sometimes you're by law required to say all the precautions for this drug or whatever, but nobody reads it. How many times do we read all the papers we sign at the doctor's office? Yeah, we have to sign them anyway, so might as well. What are you going to do? Words have lost their power. When you watch an advertisement on television or on the internet or something like that, very few words, many images, and music. Music affects how you feel. The images give you this illusion that it's going to work this way for you, and there's very, very few words, sometimes if any, and sometimes the words have nearly nothing to do with the message, the intended message. But what about music? Has music lost its power? Not at all. Music is going like this, and words are going like this. Okay. People say, well, words are very specific and words are very accurate. Is that really true? If they were so accurate, why are we always cleaning up the messes we make over email? When we think we wrote what we meant, and yet somebody else perceived it to be a very opposite thing. So words are not really very accurate. Words are symbols of meaning. How many times do you have a conversation with someone and you think, we really connected, we got this, and then later you realize that the definition of terms is not the same, and so we spoke the same words, but we did not mean the same things. One of the times that was first prominent to me is a church many years ago now that I was considering being a minister of music, and this person said, this church does really good music. They do really fine music. And then I went and visited this church, and in my definition, this was not good music at all. And I thought, it was just one of those early times where I thought, we're not defining things the same way. The definition is not the same. Yeah. Okay, so where are we going? The question is there. I don't really know, but we will project some things because it's kind of fun to think about it. All right, so things specific to the book. Job titles are increasingly inconsistent. One of the challenges of writing this book is what in the world do we call what we do? And you have to say the whatever, something. You have to do that. In the earlier version of the book, I said music ministry was the term I used consistently throughout the book. When it came time for the revision, I didn't feel comfortable with using music ministry as the term to describe. So here's some observations. There's certainly no consensus. The term music minister seems too evangelical for some, because I have grown up with the title, or matured toward the title of music minister, but in some studies, people from other denominations feel that that's kind of what the more evangelical churches call it, and that's not quite who I am. I think it still is an accurate term because I think ministry is so incredibly important and we do it through music, but that's the perception. Worship leader, good. How many of you have that title in your title? Maybe worship leader, anybody have that? But that doesn't mention music. And if music is a lot of what we do, well, it doesn't quite get there. Music director, that's quite good, but it doesn't say much about the work that we do that's beyond that. It could also easily describe the person who's doing the music for Les Mis at the community theater. It's the same thing. Or director of music, I'm not asking who has what title yet. Worship and music pastor. It's pretty good because it's music and worship, and I believe that who we are, is pastoral musicians. I really believe that. But it seems to indicate ordination. And so while some denominations have quite a few music ministers, music worship leaders who are ordained, a lot that's completely rare for other denominations. So it's kind of problematic. Minister of music and arts. It works for some people, but it omits the word worship. And it sometimes, I think, includes a far more involvement of other artists than I know any of my friends to do. I'm always a little bit afraid of that title because even though I have great appreciation for other arts, I don't know that I'm really qualified to speak to them in the way that I wish I were. But I think it moves in a good direction. I think it does assume some good things. There was a recent study, not that recent, but 5 or 6 years ago, done by the Methodists, where they surveyed hundreds of these people that we were describing and asked what their titles are. And there's a kind of a diagram in this article, and there's probably 15 or 16 that occur pretty frequently. And there's really not a winner. So it's just very varied. So what did well, let's keep going. So,
Can I just throw something out?
Yeah.
You said earlier that words have lost the power, and I agree with that. But then who cares what the job title is? I mean, does it really matter all that much as long as you're doing the work?
Yes and no. It matters to the people it matters to, and the others, they only define it by the guy, or the woman, or she, he. At the end of the day, I think we all need to be known by our first name. And whatever that means, and whatever people think about when they think about Sherry or Nancy or whatever, that is the job. That is the job. I think it really ultimately is a lot more like mom or dad, which can be very, very different for a lot of people. It can be the greatest joy or the worst pain, or lots of things, okay? So that's really what I think. But, for instance, the church that I was in a number of years ago, I had the title of music minister. I was gone from that church for 3 years, and I went back to it, and I now have the title of music and worship minister. Because they said, we want you to have a stronger oversight of the entire worship design, and we want that to be a part of your description. We want you to be strongly oversight for that. Yeah. So they intentionally said, we want this in your title because we want you to do this. So a title, like if you imagine, here's a job description, right? A job description funnels down to a title. And the title should reflect the job description. Our son was applying for something this week, and part of his application process was he had to have a letter of recommendation from a peer, which was quite interesting. And he was sharing the recommendation that he received from his peer, which I thought was one of the most brilliant letters I would have ever imagined from a high school kid. I mean, I would never have imagined a high school kid able to write, and he did a great job of choosing the right person to do his letter. But he was talking about, so what if the other person who wants this position in the high school band also asked him to write? That was our son's question. And he said, I wonder if he just changed the name. And it wouldn't have been possible because it was a great letter, the letter you want somebody to write that really says, I understand you. I get you. It's really the direct letter. But anyway, so we talked about that. And I said, when I have been in a position of writing for 2 people to receive the same position, I've just written the letters in separate days, made sure I really said what I needed to say. I've also been in charge, as some of you, of writing letters for people in evaluating their tenure. And I've been in some difficult ones through the years that were hard to write. What I've decided to do in those situations is to write the letter revisit it in a couple weeks and say, now based on what I wrote, what decision would someone else assume that I meant by what I wrote? So see the funneling down to, here's the evidence, now what do we call it, kind of thing. Yeah, so that's, so it does matter, and yet not so much. But in a book, you have to decide. You have to make a decision, you have to call it something. So that's where I got called out. Otherwise, I would be happy for being very imprecise about some of this stuff. So what I chose in the book, I think, is music and worship ministry. So I thought the ministry was important. I thought the music and worship was important. But I think I termed it music and worship ministry. These days, if without the word worship, a lot of people really aren't understanding what in the world you're reading here. And I think the word worship is important. So I think that's what I ended up doing. I was actually going to check that, double check that. What do we call our field? Church music, worship studies, sacred music, music and worship studies. Now, in the National Association of Schools of Music, they have broadened definitions to where they're allowing a lot more possibilities of what we call all these degrees. And all of these, this nomenclature is alive today. So sacred music sort of says one thing. That's pretty much the older model. That's the oldest of those models. And then music ministry. We call the music program here at Baylor the church music program. But that limits some students, and we get many, and I talked to many students every year who said, I never knew there was such a major anywhere. And people are more and more not even aware that such a program might actually exist. So that's a good question of what we do. There is no consensus, I guess, is where we're headed here. Instrumental dominance is shifting. What are the primary instruments that lead us in worship? While many churches use keyboard instruments, primarily organ, piano, etc., others may no longer use either of these instruments. What instruments dominating congregational song? The differences are broad. I really think we are at a stage, if we did a survey of churches in America, say, that I don't think the dominant leadership is organ or piano, or organ and piano, or a combination of those. I think it is rhythm band, rhythm group based is definitely, I think, more prominent. So in revising this book, that had a lot to say about what I assumed. It also challenged me to write as much about drum sets as I wrote about the organ. And in the other book, I had written a whole lot about organ purchases and stuff like that, and like nothing. I mean, I had nothing about drum sets. And starting that in 2000, I was comfortable with that because the shift wasn't where it is today. So I wrote a big section about keyboards and electronic keyboards and drum sets and a few things like that, and some about guitars. But it meant I had to read and study. Yeah. It also meant that you can't just refer to instrumentalists with so many assumptions. It meant a change of voice in the way you refer to people. Vocal ensembles are transitioning. What is the primary vocal ensemble that leads congregational singing? And in many of our churches it would be choir, and in some other churches it would be a smaller ensemble, a praise team, or we call it in our church a worship team, because we hope we do more than praise. But again, there you are to the words and how we describe what we do. Smaller vocal ensembles have increased and larger established choirs have diminished. We had an open forum, the roundtable lunch the other day, and in that roundtable, every person but one said, what I need the most help with is the fact that the choir in our church is diminishing, is declining in size, and is aging. And one woman said, a year ago we had 4 tenors, 3 of them have died. The other one, his wife died, and he moved to Dallas to be close to his children. 0 tenors, yeah. So things are shifting. So the assumption of in this new revision, I didn't use the term choir to describe worship leadership. I use vocal ensemble, something like that, to be a much more broad option. But I would say to you, we had a great discussion the other day about what do we do to boost some of our choirs, and what do we do to keep that alive? And I think that's a conversation that I may open up for a bigger conversation at next summer's conference. I think it's important. But I think it means revisioning and revitalizing and reimagining and saying, so what is it that we really believe this vocal ensemble ought to do, what really matters, and how do we hold on to the most important things about this, and then let go of some things that might really not matter if we do that, which we can decide what those are, and I won't throw those out right now because we don't have time to unpack them all. I would say, in just to get our mind going, that my mind has shifted through the years, that leading with a vocal ensemble, I say with, not necessarily like a backup group, I don't see it as that, but co-leadership has been invigorating for me in ministry, because it's allowed our church to use a small group of people with more rehearsal time and a more specific task to lead in new congregational music, to sing descants as well as contemporary songs, but not just contemporary songs. It's given us the chance to do lots of things. Like we sing around, for instance. We have people that can lead every part, and we step down on the floor and we're right here with the people. We sing some of the things like we've done with John Bell, where we line out 3 or 4 parts. Well, here is if you're singing that part, watch him, watch her. You see, I've never had the time to do that in a choir setting, even though I believe it's important and I want to do it. I would always defer to the Sunday anthem and its perfection rather than the other stuff. And I'm just being honest about that. So that's something I would encourage you to consider. Technology is assumed. So to what degree we use technology is variable from church to church, but its use is nearly assumed. And I'm not just referring to screens and that kind of thing, but it is pretty much assumed. I didn't write in this book about how to use your computer in music ministry. That would be kind of like writing about how to use the typewriter in the 60s. We just kind of had them and we used them. So the assumption is there. We have very little need to write about it, teach about technology, specifically to younger people. We've received, as all students have, critique that we're not doing enough to help our students with technology. But through the years, David Music and Terry York and I have asked the question, so who's going to teach this course? And we determined not us. So what do I do when I have technology issues in my office? I open the door, and whomever is in the hall is likely to be more of an expert than I am. That's pretty much the case. Yeah. I was talking to some man in the doctor's office a while back, and he said, "My grandson has been so helpful for me." I think he was 12. He's just been just so helpful for me in learning to do all these things.
I have a friend who teaches math, and she was talking about using PowerPoint. This was several years ago in her classes, and I said, "Oh, how did you learn to do that?" She said, "Oh, my daughter learned it in the 3rd grade, and she does it for me."
So I will admit that sometimes I ask students to do things for me because it's way easier for them. It's better use of all of our time. Yeah, and it's all going to change anyway, so you don't have to catch it. You don't have to catch every single loop it happens. Yeah. So technology is shifting. The role of social media is new, relatively new. I mean, since I wrote this book, it wasn't there, and it's there now. But social media is constantly changing as well. It's interesting that younger people are not, Facebook is not necessarily synonymous with social media for high school students. There's Instagram and Snapchat and all kinds of other things that they're continually using. They use Facebook when they want to reach the older crowd. It's interesting that our son will, when he posts something on Facebook, he's intentionally trying to let his parents' friends and other people know about something that he thought was important and good. And he'll check it diligently, And it'll be the very predictable people that will follow those things, yeah. But it's not for the daily stuff. It's not for the, here's what I did, here's where I'm at. It's not for that at all. But that shift, just to point that out to you, is very, very quick. We had I directly made a men's choir, so we had a group of about 100 guys, and PR is important for us. You know, how we reach new people and how we connect to members and all this stuff is really a big deal for us. So we were talking about our Facebook page and how to keep the energy going there. And then, so the younger members of the leadership team, the sophomores, we don't have any freshmen on the leadership team. The sophomores were saying, oh, that's really old school. And the seniors were saying, what? On Facebook. And they were the first ones, you know, on Facebook, and they were just so offended and this is, you know, this is the first time I felt old and really dated. You know, but this is like a 3-year span. And they're really, so they're, you know, trying to tweet more and, you know, do other things to reach out and be more out there.
But, you know, you were talking about letting people know, because that's an area of PR, you know, used to be the newspaper, who does that, or you know, the TV or a billboard. Well, we still do some of that, but social media, it's just taken over, and all the different ones.
Yeah.
Because which group are you doing?
That's right, that's right. And you've got to look at it depending, yeah. I spoke to the students this week over in the worship lab about how to get a possible career in music and what does that look like. And one of the things that I talked to them about was the audition process and preparing for college and all that. One of the things I said is check your email. Because the people that are the decision makers in your college decision are going to use email. And the quicker you learn to accommodate the preferred communication of the people who are the decision makers. I also said let your mom or your dad decide what you wear to the audition, because the people that are going to decide your scholarship are more like your mom and dad than they are your high school friends. So, you know, I just gave some advice like that. But I said, you wouldn't believe the number of students through the youth, not through the years, but 5 years, in the past 5 years, whom I've sent an email saying, are you interested enough in Baylor that you would like to be considered for a scholarship? If they don't answer the email, no scholarship. I mean, these days I will also text them the same thing. But they don't sometimes respond. They've got so many things going, so they don't answer. Sometimes they come and I will say, and you know, they ended up actually coming, and I thought, you know, you could have had a scholarship, but you didn't answer your email. So I just was interesting about those perceptions.
And they said that's old school.
That's right. There you go. It's costly too, isn't it?
So when you communicate like to the regular news choir, do you use their social media thing, or do they think, oh, he's on our territory trying to be cool, you know, or do you use email or do you text? Like I text my youth choir because I know they're good, and I always say, and send me a quick response here.
I send them an email every week. They are supposed to check their email every Monday night, and I send them an email every single Monday night with everything that they need to know and previewing things. So I really encourage them to check their email. But we also have a group text message thing, and they pretty much pass it down every day, like 8 o'clock. Don't forget, in 5 minutes you're supposed to be here. And you know, there's this whole system of the texting thing that we do. We're also doing these other things, but not as much. And they also will sometimes say, we'll send you an email about Randall. You know, which means that they posted this document on Google Docs. And I mean, I have access to all that, and I know how to do those things. But they know I would rather have it in my email than on Google Doc or whatever. But they're constantly, the officer team's constantly changing the technology. I mean, that's why it's hard. It's shifting all the time, and it's like, you know, we shouldn't do a survey in class about which songs you like the best and what you like the best over here. Let's post a survey. And they posted this great survey, and then they were able to just download all the material and put it in all these great files. And, you know, they're just doing brilliant things. I mean, if you let young people do the things they can do, they're amazing. And it makes me happy to see them The ownership is wonderful. And the quality of what they're doing versus my ability to do something with that quality. I'm not disabled, but the work it would take to get me there. Yeah. Let's move along here. So leadership training needs enhancing. One of the things that we've heard, I heard a lot in the book revision, and I sent a survey out to bunches and bunches of people, and was that we need more, meaning people in music and worship ministry need more training in how to be good leaders. What is it that we do to train as good leaders? So there's a lot of interest in that. Ministers are realizing that leadership skills needed to negotiate today's complex world as people are sometimes lacking in our training and experience. And it's key for us. I think that people have more problems and they need more help. Our world is more complex, so our need to lead ourselves more effectively and lead others. I talk about leadership in terms of personal leadership and leadership of others, and those are always connected. The more effective we become at our own personal leadership, the more effective we typically are at also leading others. But that's something that in the book, I did probably double, triple, quadruple the section on leadership in terms of just building up that section. So what are some things that haven't changed? We are still planning worship. Somebody years ago said, so what have you been doing the last 30 years? And this person said, getting ready for Sunday. There's a book with that title, and it's kind of a lead-in story that I often think, it's like my farm background, so what have you been doing, well, milking cows every single day, it has to happen. And worship, the great thing there is we get to start over every Monday. We get to do it again. It is practice. So, worship leadership is practice because we get another time to try it again. We visit hospitals, we make purchases, we write and rehearse music, we organize musicians into manageable units. We evaluate our reasons for ministry. We promote what we do to others in the many different ways. We attempt to manage every minute of our days better. More and more because all of our minutes seem to count more, and we have more things to do with those same moments. We try to work effectively with other ministers and congregants. So these are other big picture things. I spent more time in the book even trying to help us work with relationships, because relationships really are what define our ministries. Gaining perspective. We can easily obsess on all that has changed and what we've lost. It doesn't take brilliance to just obsess on what we've lost. It is such an easy default. We can lament that change is too slow and time is running out. So on the other hand, you can say, I want everything to be here, perhaps a younger person, and nothing's changing quickly enough for me. And at some point in our life, we want things to move really quickly. Other points in our life, we want things to slow down. And it's not always age-based either. It certainly isn't. I was talking to a friend of mine who is very near in retirement and was saying, I'm not really sure I'm doing what I really should be doing. And I said, 4 years for you is a really long time. And if you waste this 4 years, that's huge for you if you don't do what you really value most. And I said, I've health going well, I should have 15, 20 left, something like that. My time's not quite in the same proportion as yours to be the same, similar age. So see, it's not always just one or the other. The core of our field in our ministry is fully intact and hopefully is thriving. There's immense hope among music and worship in the church. And if we don't know that, we're not experiencing, let's make friends with some people for whom their perspective is different. It's really telling. So where are we going? Let's spend 5 minutes here, and I'm going to just kind of go through a little bulleted list of some things I've jotted down. I believe that there will be greater diversity in worship from congregation to congregation. I don't think that's going to diminish, that this congregation will sound very different from this congregation. I had a discussion after this session yesterday with a group of younger folks, people in their 20s and 30s that kind of hung back and they said, You really think that's going to happen? And so absolutely, because we are choosing music from a broader and broader and ever-broadening body of material. So that means that the shared material is going to be less and less. And as the shared material is not so much driven by market, but is driven by individuals posting and all that, it's going to get broader and broader and broader, and which is going to mean individualized kinds of congregations, which is really quite hopeful, actually, because it means our worship will be more contextual and it will be more inclined toward the context of the people that are ministered to here and for whom this church is perceiving itself to minister to. So I see that actually as a good thing. There will be immense variety of worship within a worship gathering. I think that we will have fewer and fewer churches that have contemporary or traditional or whatever. I think we will have churches that simply have worship. Because I don't think these labels are going to mean a lot much longer. I think they're going to diminish because they've already lost their power. Because what does contemporary mean? What does traditional mean? I've visited a few churches and it certainly means different things in different places. I think the church, meaning the people, are going to start to call us out more and more and say, I heard this song, have you heard this? Well, why not? And I don't think, I really don't like that kind of music is going to be an okay answer. Because the value that people associate, if you say, I don't like that kind of music, and Sherry says, have you heard this? Then I am saying, I don't accept you. I don't have a relationship with you, and we are not friends because our music defines us in such a huge way. But I tell students all the time that where your training is going to be incredibly valuable is when the church asks you to do these things, you're going to say, yes, I can do that. I have the skill to do that, or I have the skill to learn it. And that's where it's going to be really, really valuable. I think in some of our churches, the people are going to realize that we are the people with no clothes, and we're not very deep in terms of our ability to offer. Because younger people are not turned off to whatever they perceive as beautiful and as touching to their hearts. Also very hopeful. More and more, we will find more and more artful use of technology. Technology will use the trappings of tech, and it will just be the way we do it. We won't distinguish it as anything other than, we won't even describe it, because we won't need to describe it. It will just simply, because compared to what? At some point in history, we come to a reading session like this, we won't pass any music out. We will simply all log into some site, it'll all be set, we'll watch it, see the music on whatever we might be using at that point in history, and we will think, how quaint it must have been for those people to use music. Use hard copies. And in my world, we still have stacks of music. Everywhere I live has stacks of music. And I will be so quaint, and how did he ever do that? I can't imagine doing that. You already have friends, or you maybe lead from a tablet, or you lead from some kind of iPad or something to worship, and a bunch of my students lead from iPads instead of folders and all kinds of things, and it makes sense. I'm afraid they're going to go wrong. That's a lot for the user. Mostly I don't trust the user. It's not necessarily the technology.
Exactly.
Yeah. There will be higher appreciation for creative and innovative leaders. I believe that those people that are innovative and creative will be more and more highly prized. There will be an emphasis on teams and team building as a primary skill. That's already prominent in job descriptions. Building a team. Can you draw people around? Can you choose the right people? Leadership will be coming alongside. So rather than for me to be out in front of the pack and everybody be back here, we're going to be walking shoulder to shoulder, moving toward a goal that we have determined. And leadership will be the ability to draw people to walk alongside rather than, can I just forge the path? Which is so much healthier, isn't it really? It really is. There will be a continual de-emphasis of denominations. That is declining so fast. And here are the people that don't know it's declining. The people in charge of these organizations. The people who are charged to keep it alive. And it's changing quickly. And it's not just changing from the hierarchy, it's also changing from the commonality of what we now call, we all own, that used to be considered, that's their thing. It's not their thing anymore, it's ours. We're all owning it. More ministers with multiple vocations. I think there will be many more ministers who are not full-time, because everybody wants specialists for everything. And young people are very comfortable with picking and choosing a number of different things that they do and putting together kind of a life of a variety of things. And that's not just going to be true for music, so don't despair. It's just going to be true for us. We're going to have part-time physicians and part-time people, because they're not going to work 70 hours a week just because you can. They're going to say, I'll work 15 hours a week and I'll do this. But I'm not going to do that anymore because I want to do this. And they're going to be able to make better decisions and healthier decisions, I think. And they're going to live in smaller homes, and they're not going to be in debt as much as we are. And they're going to be able to make choices more because their values will be different. What?
They won't be exhausted.
That's right. They're going to stop working when they get tired, rather than some of us. Churches will be led by core teams with shared responsibilities. So we will say on a Sunday, so how are we going to proclaim this week? Through music, through media, is who's going to speak this message? And it might be you, it might be me. Well, that's your story. I couldn't say that. Rather than you always proclaim, no matter if everybody knows you're the worst person to say that in the whole church, which we've not really said in the past. A complex loss of style, a complete loss of style is a preference. Diversity in music and art forms will be expected, and it will be modeled, and it will be odd that we would have all these discussions about style, because it's music, it's what it is. Why would we draw lines? The business of church will diminish, both in terms of products and services, and in terms of the church as a business. I think of many more things that serve the church will be free online. I think composers will post their music because they feel compelled, and because this was a gift that they were given to share with the church, and they will consider it it will denigrate the value of the music to sell it. And I think copyright at some point will be quite quaint, and we will say, why did we own everything? What possessed us to think that we should make money from these things? Now, I won't probably live to see all these things, but there have been things that have happened in the last month that I didn't think I would live to see either. So, I'm just telling you, I am really beginning to change my mind about, how far into the perceived promised land I might travel. I used to think that I would stand on the river and look over, but I don't know. I don't know about some things. We'll move quickly here. The adherence to the Bible as literal will continue to diminish. The Bible will be viewed in terms of overarching principles as opposed to the source from which we gain specific answers. We will discover, I think, that the Bible will not be as clear as we said it was. And I believe that it will not have the answers that we're looking for. Therefore, we will say, what are the overarching principles? And we will make there will be huge theological changes. They are brewing, they are happening. We're just not necessarily calling them out. And when you do, it's not, people don't perceive you well sometimes. The church will lead leaders to diverse and outlet and preparation, just kind of a general saying. Broadly trained in music and arts, team players view the world collaboratively, they are resourceful and imaginative, and they are communicative and articulate. So what a tall order. But we are those people. We can be those people. Power will become an even uglier word. If you want to turn off a group of young people, start pulling power moves and be power hungry. Leaders who are multilingual and multi-musical. We will be asked to speak multiple languages, both musically and linguistically. Musical languages will mean we will need to travel in many musical styles. It does not mean if you travel to another country, does it mean you need to speak Spanish fluently? No, but it certainly means you must study the culture and you must have a translator. So musically, I can say, Mary Kay, what should we do here? And she can be the translator, and that's where the team is going to be our salvation. Humility and collaboration will describe the future music leader and worship leader. I wish we had time for questions, but I'm happy to stay around and respond. But thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming to this 8 o'clock session.